Well, hello. We are working on our Unit 2 notes. So the first thing I want to show you is our learning targets. So we'll go ahead and do that. Let's click that here. We are going to be doing notes on learning targets A, B, and C, explain how living things acquire energy and matter for life, describe how organisms store energy, and then diagram the ways in which heterotrophs use the raw materials they ingest. I'd like for you to pull out the notes packet. If you can, print it and write directly on it. Otherwise, you can type directly on it and submit that for your notes. I believe it's 19 pages long. So if you can double-side print, that would be ideal. And then here are our notes that go with that. Okay. And I'm not on the home one. Control home. There we go. Ugh. Hold on. Apparently I was on the wrong slide. There we go. Let's look at Earth's atmosphere, photosynthesis and respiration. And I'll put that back up for now. I'll take it off when we need to. So let's look at the first slide, and it says describe the patterns you see. So take a minute, look at it, pause the video. I'm not going to pause for this. The one underneath me is 2019. This is the most recent monthly mean, so average carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And that, after you've paused and looked at, you're going to hopefully see that there is this lovely seesaw pattern that shows seasonally how much carbon dioxide is changing in our atmosphere, but the general trend is upward. So you'll see that when there's times of winter, we have less photosynthesis occurring, so we have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and in spring and summer we have more carbon dioxide, or less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as we have more photosynthesis occurring, and this happens every year. So it's called a seesaw pattern. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can put some information down on for what evidence do you have to support the pattern or trend that you saw. Let's look at the next slide, and we have energy. There are three main forms of energy on Earth. We have light energy and heat energy and chemical energy. All living things use chemical energy to maintain homeostasis. And then we also have the homeostasis definition, which is cut off on the bottom here of your screen. So homeostasis is the state of steady internal conditions, meaning everything stays stable, like pH, temperature, blood pressure, amongst other things that we keep stable in our bodies. Okay, so that's homeostasis. And so in your star on the paper on your notes, it says all things use chemical energy, and why? And that's because everything needs to maintain homeostasis. So that in the green box you should put homeostasis. Okay. All right, let's look at adenosine triphosphate, which is your first vocab word. Which is ATP. We all refer to it as ATP frequently. It is a form of energy. It is what powers the chemical reactions in your cells. So on here, on your notes packet, we have a molecule of ATP. So what you need to do is label the orange-ish box adenine, okay? And then the blue hexagon is your sugar, ribose, okay? So that's labeled ribose. And then each of the little circles, you get a P inside one of them for phosphate. There's 3 phosphates in an ATP molecule. And you'll see on there, I've already labeled that there's just a little bit of energy stored between the ribose and the first phosphate group. A little more energy stored between the first and the second phosphate groups. But then there's a lot of energy stored between the second and third phosphate groups, which is important. So make sure you note where the majority of the energy is stored, right here between the second and third arrows. So on your slide or on your notes, I would even put make a star, for that's where most of the energy is stored. That's important because if you look at the next slide, we look at adding a phosphate group to ADP to make ATP. And likewise, you can have ATP break off a phosphate group and get left with ADP. So it's kind of like a rechargeable battery. So ATP releases energy when the bond between the last two phosphates breaks, which will form ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. Okay. Sunlight or food chemical energy is used to reform that bond, making ATP again. So sunlight energy comes in, takes the ADP, bonds the phosphate to it, and you get ATP. When you need to use that energy for cell processes, you break off that that phosphate and you get ADP. So it's like a cycle, it goes back and forth. Okay, energy flows between living things. So photosynthesis is the process by which autotrophs convert light energy to chemical energy. It's the only way we can get energy into our system, and we need a constant influx of it. So that's why it's very important that we have photosynthesis occurring. I'd like for you to write down on here what are autotrophs and what are heterotrophs. So hopefully you can remember auto means self. So autotrophs make their own food. They are our producers, like leaves, trees, grasses, plants, algae. And then our heterotrophs are things that eat anything else. So they cannot make their own food. They have to consume. So they are your consumers. So you have your producers, autotrophs. Consumers are your heterotrophs. Okay? And then let's look at how does carbon dioxide get into the plant. So on your homework we talked about, or you had to draw a stomata, and that's plural. Which are structures on leaves, and they control the flow of gases into and out of the cell. When they open, they let carbon dioxide in, and then they let oxygen and water vapor out. And here's another vocab term. You have evapotranspiration, which is water vapor exiting a plant cell through the stomata. It is controlled by the guard cells. So the guard cells make up the stomata with the opening, okay? And we'll talk about the structure, or we'll look at the structure of that in just a second. And the part that you can't see below is on your notes in the big blue arrow. It says that the stomata are the things that control the rate of photosynthesis. So I would definitely know that. It's being called out specifically to let you know that you need to have a good understanding of what is controlling it. Okay. So now let's look exactly at what a stomata looks like, open and closed. And if we were at school, we would be doing a lab where we would look at open and closed stomata. And on your paper, you don't have all of the information. All you have are the two pictures. So I would write down some notes of when swollen with guard cells, when swollen with water, guard cells will pull apart from each other. So they kind of inflate like a balloon, and they take that shape, kind of like a half circle, to make that opening bigger so that it will let the water vapor out, the oxygen out, and the carbon dioxide in. When it's deflated, when there's no water in the vacuoles or very little, the stoma is closed and no gas exchange is occurring. They would want to close when it's too hot outside. If they were to remain open, they would lose too much water vapor, and that would be not a good thing. Then they would wilt. And then they also close at night because there's no photosynthesis occurring. Okay. Next, we have our structure of our chloroplasts. And on here, I'd like for you to put in your box where it says note many thylakoids, so the first line is thylakoids, stacked up make the granum, and granum is kind of cut off there for you, but the granum is spelled right here, G-R-A-N-U-M, so you have a bunch of thylakoids and then the granum. And the thylakoids are important because that's where the dark reaction occurs. I'm sorry, the light reaction occurs, just kidding, light reaction, which we'll talk about in our next slide. And surrounding our thylakoids we have the stroma, which is different than the stoma, and that's where our dark reaction occurs. And these are both within the chloroplasts. Also, you can look on page 231 in your textbook, which is looking at figure 8-5. And they have a nice up-close picture of that in there for you too. All right, the light reaction. This is going to occur in the thylakoids. Energy is transferred to electrons in the chlorophyll pigment or other pigments, and there are other pigments that are involved in the structure in leaves, not the structure of leaves. This will activate a system that splits water into hydrogen and oxygen. That's important. You need to have your hydrogen separated from your oxygen in order to form glucose. But it also means oxygen is a waste product, so it's then getting released as waste, which is important because we need that. We also have ADP going in here. Notice energy is being stored after this, so it's getting converted into something that can be stored. So we need lots of ADP to have lots of ATP coming out, and then the oxygen comes out. So water comes in, ADP comes in, ATP goes out, and oxygen goes out. And we're not going to worry about the NAD+. Okay. Excited electrons will move through the electron transport chain and produce molecules of ATP and NADPH. Okay. The electron transport chain is also abbreviated as ETC. And it starts, we used to talk a lot more about this, and you used to have to know a lot more about it, but we don't have to know as much anymore. So there's two parts. You have photosystem 1 and photosystem 2, and then we aren't even going to focus on ATP synthase and any of that stuff. But inside the thylakoid, you have the light reaction occurring, and then everything comes out to the light independent or dark reactions. Okay, so which means we're going to be talking about that now. So in the dark reactions, it's also called the Calvin cycle or light independent. So you'll see it referred to 3 different ways. Makes it very confusing for everybody. I will refer to it primarily as the dark reaction. In here, the plants that absorb carbon dioxide from the surroundings through the stomata, then once in the stroma, so they've converted ADP to ATP in the thylakoids, and now you have ATP in the stroma. Carbon dioxide is then fixed using the energy from ATP and NADPH to form a 3-carbon sugar, which is not glucose. You need to get that to happen twice in order to get glucose to occur. So it goes around this dark cycle, the dark reaction here, or Calvin cycle, 2 times to get enough sugars to make glucose. So in your yellow circle, the cycle must occur 2 times. Because 1 time is not going to be enough. Okay, carbon dioxide comes in, produces sugar molecules, aka glucose. The NADPH loses its hydrogen and converts to NADP+. The ATP is converted to ADP, and that means you broke that last phosphate off, which means you've released energy. And it's a lot of energy. It's not a little energy, it's a lot of energy. And you can follow this in the reaction, the circle here of the dark cycle, dark reaction. Okay, let's look at photosynthesis equation. It's on your paper, so that's awesome. But I would like for you to also label the reactants and the products on your paper. So anytime you have a reaction, you're going to have your reactants here to the left of your equation, and then the products come out. It produces the products. Kind of makes sense. So in this case, we have 6, and this is a balanced version of the equation. 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 water molecules in the presence of light will produce 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. And this is basically what this says. So you have your reactants is carbon dioxide and water and light, because that's absolutely necessary you have light, to produce glucose and oxygen. The light energy is used to convert water and carbon dioxide to high energy sugars and oxygen. Okay. Next, we're almost done. A summary of photosynthesis. You need to copy this diagram down. This is a very important one. It is also in your textbook. You can see page 111, figure 7-6C, to have another one, and it's probably got a nice little caption to go with it. But you have your light-dependent reactions occurring in the thylakoids. In the stroma, you have your light-independent or dark reactions occurring. And it's showing you that you make ATP in the light-dependent ones, goes in, then carbon dioxide comes in, and you use some energy up, and you get ADP left to go into the light-dependent one, which uses the water and produces oxygen. So carbon dioxide is used in the light-independent, water is used in the light-dependent, and oxygen is produced in the light-dependent reaction. And then the whole chloroplast is lined with sugars. Okay. There are some factors that are going to affect the rate of photosynthesis. The ones that we are commonly going to see is temperature, and that's because enzymes that are within the cells of plants work best between 0 degrees and 35 degrees Celsius, not Fahrenheit. And light intensity will also play a role, which is why in the fall and winter time you have leaves changing colors and dropping, because the light intensity has changed, it's decreased, which means your rate of photosynthesis is decreasing, which means your plants cannot keep their leaves. They have to drop them. Carbon dioxide concentration will also affect the rate of photosynthesis. The more carbon dioxide you have to a point, the more photosynthesis will occur. And then water has to be available. We all know what happens if we have a drought. Lots of plants die. They can't do photosynthesis. So here's a nice graph showing you light intensity. And the more intense the light is, it's going to affect the rate of photosynthesis. And we looked at sun plants versus shade plants. So I'm sure most of you have seen there's plants that do better in the shade. If you put a shade plant in the sun and it gets more intense sunlight, it's not going to do well. It's going to shrivel up and die. But you can see the sun plant will actually produce more photosynthesis at a higher in light intensity than your shade plant. It'll tap out a little bit sooner than your sun plant. And last we have, why is photosynthesis important? That is because plants use glucose for energy and growth. They make cellulose from they string together chains of glucose molecules to make cellulose, which is what the plants use to grow. Most plants store glucose as starches. Potatoes, for instance, are very starchy. They have a lot of glucose. And that is really the most important thing, is that we get glucose out of photosynthesis. So in your green sun, glucose, it's got right here. You need to add chemical energy inside your sun. It's a chemical energy form. And then here we have a structure of a glucose molecule, okay? Or a sugar molecule. That's actually amylase, not glucose. So, all right. That is it for photosynthesis. We will do cell respiration next. So we did through slide, let's see, 17 today, and then the next one will be our next chunk. If you have questions, please email me or your teacher, and make sure you fill out your notes and get them turned in when you are asked to get them turned into Google Classroom. Okay? Thank you.